And that, class, is why the Zorgblatt Confederation's mental shielding techniques are considered the gold standard across the Galactic Union, droned Professor Zelmorb, his tentacles waving lazily in the air as he concluded his lecture. A chorus of telepathic acknowledgements rippled through the classroom, accompanied by the soft rustling of various appendages as the students shifted in their seats. Well, most of them anyway. In the back corner, a solitary figure remained perfectly still, save for the occasional twitch of her lips or the subtle crinkling around her eyes. Professor Zelmorb's eye stalks swiveled towards the anomaly. "Miss Hernandez," he called out, his voice a mixture of exasperation and amusement. "I don't suppose you'd care to share your thoughts on the matter? Or perhaps you'd prefer to continue whatever fascinating internal monologue has captured your attention so thoroughly?" Laughter bubbled up from the class, a cacophony of clicks, chirps, and warbles that would have sent any unprepared human running for the hills. But not Sophia Hernandez. Oh no, she was made of sterner stuff. Sophia's eyes snapped open, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of depriving the class of such riveting information." "Professor," she drawled, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to fill a small ocean, "please do go on about the intricacies of psychic shielding. I'm sure it'll come in handy the next time I'm trying to keep the voices in my head from singing show tunes." The classroom erupted in a mixture of gasps, giggles, and confused trills. Professor Zelmorb's tentacles twitched in annoyance, but there was a glimmer of amusement in his compound eyes. "Miss T. Hernandez, while I appreciate your unique perspective, I must remind you that this is a serious subject. The ability to shield one's mind is crucial in a galaxy teeming with telepathic species." Sophia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Oh, I'm well aware, Professor. But you have to admit, it's a bit rich coming from a species that can't even handle a little caffeine without going into cardiac arrest." More laughter, this time tinged with a hint of nervousness. The other students weren't quite sure how to react to this brazen display of human humor. Sophia's desk neighbor, a jellyfish-like creature named Blorbax, pulsed with a mixture of admiration and concern. Sophia Blorbax whispered, his bioluminescent tendrils flickering anxiously, "Maybe you shouldn't antagonize the professor. Remember what happened last time?" Sophia waved off her friend's concern with a lazy flick of her wrist. "Relax, Blorby. It's all in good fun. Besides, old Ixalmorb loves me. I keep him on his toes, or whatever passes for toes in that gelatinous mass he calls a body." Professor Zelmorb cleared his throat, or rather, made a sound approximating a throat clearing, given his distinct lack of anything resembling a human respiratory system. "Well, Ms. Hernandez, since you seem so eager to participate, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your own mental shielding techniques for the class." A hush fell over the room. Even the ambient psychic chatter that usually filled the background went silent. All eyes, eye stalks, and various sensory organs turned towards Sophia. For a moment, Sophia's confident grin faltered. But then, like a switch had been flipped, her eyes lit up with that dangerous gleam that her classmates had come to both fear and admire. "Oh, Professor," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "I thought you'd never ask." With exaggerated slowness, Sophia stood up, smoothing out the wrinkles in her uniform. She made her way to the front of the class, each step deliberate and dramatic. As she passed by her classmates, she winked at a few, causing a ripple of nervous giggles and concerned warbles. "Now, class," Professor Zelmorb began, his tentacles writhing with what might have been anticipation or dread. It was hard to tell with cephalopods. "Miss Hernandez will demonstrate the human approach to mental shielding. I must warn you, it may be unconventional." Sophia took her place at the front of the room, facing her classmates with a grin that would have made the Cheshire Cat proud. "All right, folks," she announced, cracking her knuckles, "prepare to have your minds blown. Figuratively speaking, of course. We don't want another incident like the Great Cranial Explosion of 43, do we?" A collective shudder ran through the class at the mention of that infamous event. Even Professor Zelmorb's tentacles curled in on themselves slightly. "Now, the key to human mental shielding," Sophia continued, her voice taking on a mock-serious tone, "is to fill your mind with so much nonsense that any telepath trying to read your thoughts will run away screaming. Observe." With that, Sophia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The class leaned forward in anticipation, psychic feelers extended cautiously. What happened next could only be described as chaos. The classroom erupted into a cacophony of mental noise. Students reeled back, their various appendages flailing wildly. Blorbax's bioluminescent tendrils flashed like a disco ball on overdrive. A Vixillion in the front row let out a high-pitched shriek that shattered 3 of the classroom's windows. And through it all, Sophia stood at the front, eyes closed, a serene smile on her face. Professor Zelmorb, being more experienced in dealing with human mental oddities, managed to maintain his composure, mostly. His eye stalks were spinning so fast they were in danger of unscrewing themselves from his head. "Miss Hernandez," he said, his voice strained, "would you care to explain what in the name of the 7 moons of Zorgoth you're doing?" Sophia opened one eye, her grin widening. Why, Professor, I'm simply demonstrating the advanced human technique of mental white noise, you see. Instead of building walls around our thoughts, we humans prefer to flood our minds with a constant stream of utterly useless information. She paused for dramatic effect, reveling in the bewildered and slightly traumatized expressions of her classmates. Right now, for example, I'm reciting the lyrics to Never Gonna Give You Up backwards, while simultaneously calculating the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow, and visualizing a tap-dancing elephant wearing a tutu. The classroom fell silent, save for the occasional whimper or confused gurgle. Professor Zalmorp's tentacles drooped in defeat. "I see," he said, though his tone suggested he very much did not see. "And this is effective." Sophia's grin threatened to split her face in two. "Oh, absolutely. You should have seen the look on the face of the last Zygonian who tried to read my mind. Poor fellow's antennae were tied in knots for weeks." A tentative tendril of thought brushed against Sophia's mind. It belonged to Zixnax, a particularly brave or foolish Andromeda native with more curiosity than self-preservation instinct. I don't understand." Zixnax's mental voice quavered. "It's like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a planet-wide desert, while being pelted with confetti and Rick Astley songs." Sophia turned to Zixnax, giving them a wink. "Exactly. And that, my tentacled friend, is the beauty of the human mind. We're so chaotic that even we don't know what we're thinking half the time. How's a telepath supposed to make sense of it?" Professor Zalmorp, having finally regained some semblance of control over his spinning ire stalks, cleared his throat analogous. "Yes, well, thank you, Miss Hernandez, for that illuminating demonstration. I'm sure we'll all need some time to process what we've just experienced." As Sophia made her way back to her seat, basking in the mix of awe and terror emanating from her classmates, Professor Zalmorp added, "And perhaps a few millennia of therapy." The rest of the class passed in a blur of nervous glances and muted psychic chatter. When the bell finally rang, or rather, when the psychic alarm pulsed through the school, there was an almost audible sigh of relief from the non-human students. As they filed out of the classroom, Blawbacks pulsed nervously next to Sophia. "That was intense," he said, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with a mix of admiration and concern. "I think you broke Gezorp's tertiary brain lobe." Sophia glanced over at Jorp, a multi-brained Tregelian who was currently trying to exit the classroom through a wall. He'll be fine," she said with a dismissive wave. "A little mental reorganization never hurt anyone. Well, except for that one time on Epsilon IV, but we don't talk about that." Blawbacks's tendrils curled in confusion. "I don't understand how you do it, Sophia. How can you just think like that all the time? Doesn't it drive you mad?" Sophia laughed, a sound that still sent shivers down the spines or equivalent structures of many of her classmates. "Oh, Blawby, my gelatinous friend, that's the secret. We humans are already a little mad. We just learn to embrace it." As they made their way down the corridor, weaving through a sea of aliens of all shapes and sizes, Sophia couldn't help but reflect on her unique position in the Galactic Academy of Psychic Arts and Sciences. She was the only human in her year, and one of only a handful in the entire academy. When she'd first arrived, fresh-faced and eager from Earth, she'd been met with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and more than a little fear. After all, humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy as unpredictable, dangerous Deathworlders. But Sophia had quickly learned to use that reputation to her advantage. If they expected her to be unpredictable, well, she'd give them unpredictable. And if her methods were a little unorthodox, well, that was just part of the human charm. "You know," Blawback said, interrupting her thoughts, "I've always wondered, what exactly were you daydreaming about that got Professor Zalmorp so worked up?" Sophia's grin turned mischievous. "Oh, nothing much. Just imagining what would happen if I introduced the concept of memes to the Galactic Union's High Council." Blawbacks's entire body pulsed with alarm. "You wouldn't." "Relax," Blawby Sophia said, patting one of his tendrils reassuringly. "I'm not actually going to do it, probably, maybe, well, not today at least." As they entered the cafeteria, a hush fell over the room. All eyes and various other sensory organs turned towards Sophia. She basked in the attention for a moment before making her way to the food synthesizers. "Let's see," she mused, scrolling through the options. "What's the most horrifying thing I can eat in front of a bunch of telepaths today?" Blawbacks's tendrils curled in anticipation of the impending chaos. "Please, not the extra spicy setting again. Half the empaths in our year still haven't recovered from last time." Sophia's eyes lit up. "Oh, good idea, thanks, Blawby." Before Blawbacks could protest, Sophia had already punched in her order. The synthesizer hummed to life, and a moment later, a steaming plate of what looked like writhing tentacles covered in a violently red sauce materialized. "Perfect," Sophia said, picking up her tray. "Now, let's go make some new friends, shall we?" As they made their way through the cafeteria, Sophia couldn't help but notice the way the other students parted before her like the Red Sea. It was a far cry from her first day at the academy when she'd been the one nervously navigating the alien crowd. She spotted an empty table near the center of the room and made a beeline for it. As she sat down, she noticed a group of Zygonians at the next table over, their antennae twitching nervously. "Hey there," Sophia called out, waving cheerfully. "You guys want to see a cool human trick?" The Zygonians' antennae went rigid with fear. One of them, braver than the rest, managed to stammer out a response. What kind of trick?" Sophia's grin widened. "Oh, nothing too crazy. Just a little demonstration of human digestive capabilities. You see this sauce?" She pointed to the violently red substance coating her meal. "On my planet, we call this ghost pepper sauce. Want to know why?" Before anyone could stop her, Sophia scooped up a heaping forkful of the sauce-covered tentacles and shoved it into her mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, "Sweet mother of mercy," Sophia yelled, her face turning as red as the sauce. "IT burns. IT burns so good." The cafeteria erupted into chaos. Empaths clutched their heads in sympathetic agony. Telepaths reeled back, overwhelmed by the intensity of Sophia's thoughts. A group of Aquarians at a nearby table dove into their hydration tanks, trying to escape the second-hand spice. Through it all, Sophia continued to shovel the fiery food into her mouth, tears streaming down her face, a manic grin plastered across her features. Blawbacks, who had wisely taken cover under the table, pulsed with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. "Sophia," he called out, "was this really necessary?" Sophia paused mid-bite, her face flushed and her eyes watering. "Necessary? No. Hilarious. Absolutely." As the chaos in the cafeteria slowly subsided, replaced by a mix of nervous laughter and bewildered murmurs, Sophia couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Sure, she might be the only human in her class, a Deathworlder among the stars, but moments like these reminded her why she'd come to the Galactic Academy in the first place. It wasn't just about learning to control her latent psychic abilities or understanding the intricacies of interspecies diplomacy. It was about pushing boundaries, challenging preconceptions, and maybe, just maybe, teaching these aliens a thing or two about the indomitable human spirit. And if that meant occasionally setting her mouth on fire for the sake of a good laugh, well, that was a price she was more than willing to pay. As the bell rang, or rather, as the psychic pulse signaling the end of lunch rippled through the school, Sophia gathered her things, still hiccuping slightly from the spice. "Come on, Blobby," she said, helping her gelatinous friend out from under the table. "We've got xenobiology next, and I heard we're dissecting Plutonian slime molds today. Want to bet on how many colors I can turn before the class is over?" Blawback's tendrils curled in resignation. "Sometimes, Sophia, I think you enjoy this a little too much." Sophia's grin was answer enough as they made their way out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a sea of bewildered aliens and the lingering scent of ghost peppers. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes, each one presenting new opportunities for Sophia to showcase the unique brand of chaos that only a human could bring to a galactic academy. In xenobiology, she managed to startle the normally unflappable Professor Zixlorb by casually mentioning that humans used to eat some of the deadly toxins they were studying as recreational substances. The resulting lecture on the dangers of human risk-taking behaviors lasted well into the next period. Advanced telekinesis class saw Sophia accidentally, or so she claimed, levitating half the classroom's furniture while daydreaming about Earth's gravity. The sight of desks and chairs floating lazily near the ceiling while Sophia snoozed peacefully at her desk was one that would haunt her classmates' dreams for cycles to come. As the final class of the day, interspecies ethics and etiquette, rolled around, Sophia found herself both exhausted and exhilarated. It had been a productive day of sowing chaos and challenging alien preconceptions, but even Deathworlders needed their rest. "All right, class," chirped Professor Kihara, her iridescent feathers ruffling with excitement. "Today we'll be discussing the delicate art of gift-giving across species. Can anyone tell me why this is such an important topic?" A forest of appendages shot into the air: tentacles, pincers, pseudopods, and the occasional energy tendril. Sophia, for once, seemed content to sit this one out, her eyes half closed as she slouched in her seat. Professor Kihexnara's compound eyes sparkled as she surveyed the room. "Ah, Zekesulf, why don't you share your thoughts?" A tall, willowy being with skin like polished opal stood up, its voice a melodious hum. "Gift-giving is a universal concept that transcends species boundaries, Professor. However, what is considered a thoughtful gift in one culture may be deeply offensive or even dangerous in another. Understanding these nuances is crucial for maintaining harmonious interstellar relations." "Excellent. Zeksilf," Professor Kihek Nara trilled. "Can anyone give us an example of a gift-giving faux pas?" The class fell silent, each student lost in thought. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sophia's hand shot up. Professor Kihexnara's feathers fluttered nervously. "Yes, Miss Hernandez, you have an example to share." Sophia straightened up, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Oh, do I ever, Professor?" Have you ever heard about the time the Arcturian ambassador tried to gift the human delegation a box of live Terran spiders? A collective gasp rippled through the classroom. Even Professor Nara's beak fell open in shock. You see, Sophia continued, warming to her topic, the Arcturians had heard that humans kept small, furry creatures as pets. They thought spiders, being small and sort of furry, would make the perfect gift. What they didn't realize was that most humans are terrified of spiders. She paused for dramatic effect, enjoying the rapt attention of her classmates. So there they were, in the middle of this fancy diplomatic reception, and the Arcturian ambassador proudly presents this ornate box to the human ambassador. The human opens it, expecting some rare alien artifact, and instead finds it full of very large, very alive earth spiders. What happened next, someone whispered, their voice a mix of horror and fascination. Sophia's grin widened. Total chaos. The human ambassador screamed and dropped the box. Spiders went everywhere. Half the human delegation climbed on tables or chairs. The other half tried to squash the spiders, which of course horrified the Arcturians, who thought they were watching their carefully chosen gifts being murdered. The classroom erupted in a cacophony of laughter, gasps and concerned trills. Professor Nara looked like she couldn't decide whether to be impressed or appalled. And that, class, Sophia concluded with a flourish, is why you always research the species you're gifting to. Otherwise you might accidentally start an interstellar incident with a box of spiders. As the laughter died down, Professor Nara managed to regain her composure. Well, Miss Hernandez, that was certainly illuminating. Though perhaps not quite the example I was expecting. Sophia leaned back in her chair, looking supremely satisfied. Happy to help, Professor. Should I tell them about the time the Venusian embassy accidentally gifted the Jovian ambassador a live volcano? That won't be necessary, Professor Nara squawked hastily. I think we've had quite enough excitement for one day. Now, let's move on to discussing proper etiquette when dining with silicon-based lifeforms. As the professor launched into her lecture, Sophia felt a gentle psychic nudge from Blawbax. Was that spider story really true? His mental voice whispered, tinged with a mix of awe and skepticism. Sophia's grin never faltered as she thought back. Mostly, I may have exaggerated the size of the spiders, and the number of diplomats who climbed on furniture, but the essence of it, absolutely true. Blawbax's tendrils curled in amused disbelief. Sometimes I think half the stories you tell about Earth and humans must be made up. I mean, keeping venomous arachnids as pets, accidentally gifting volcanoes. It all sounds too bizarre to be real. Sophia's mental laughter echoed in Blawbax's mind. Oh, my sweet summer child, she thought back, her mental voice dripping with amusement. You have no idea. The universe may be vast and full of wonders, but I guarantee you, nothing out there is weirder than humanity. We're the galactic champions of weird. As the class continued, Sophia found her mind wandering once again. She thought about her home, about Earth, that beautiful blue marble hanging in space, teeming with life and bursting with contradictions. A world that had produced both unimaginable horrors and indescribable beauty. A death world that had given birth to a species so resilient, so adaptable, that they had clawed their way to the stars through sheer stubbornness and a hefty dose of luck. She thought about her classmates, these strange and wonderful beings from across the galaxy. How many of them, she wondered, really understood what it meant to be human? How many of them could comprehend the depth of human emotions, the breadth of human imagination? A small part of her felt a pang of homesickness, but a larger part, the part that had driven her to apply to the Galactic Academy in the first place, felt a surge of excitement. Because every day here was an opportunity to learn, yes, but also an opportunity to teach, to show these aliens that humans were more than just the Deathworlders they'd heard about in stories, that they were complex, contradictory, infuriating, and wonderful. And if that teaching involved the occasional disrupted class, exploded science experiment, or impromptu stand-up comedy routine, well, that was just part of the human experience. As the final bell of the day rang, or rather, as the final psychic pulse rippled through the school, Sophia gathered her things with a contented sigh. It had been a good day. Chaotic, sure, but good. Hey, Blawby, she called out as they left the classroom. Want to hit up the Holo Arcade later? I heard they just got a new game in. Something about simulating the mating rituals of gas giant inhabitants. Blawbax's whole body pulsed with alarm. Sophia, no. Remember what happened last time we played one of those games? Half the arcade thought we were actually trying to court Jovian storm clouds. Sophia's laughter echoed down the corridor, turning heads and raising eyebrows or equivalent alien features as they passed. Come on, where's your sense of adventure? Besides, I promise I won't try to marry any weather phenomena this time. Probably. As they made their way towards the dormitories weaving through the colorful throng of alien students, Sophia couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging. Sure, she was different. Sure, she stood out like a sore thumb, a phrase that had taken her hours to explain to her non-human friends. But here, among the stars, surrounded by beings from 1,000 different worlds, she was home. Because in the end, that's what humanity was all about. Finding a home among the stars, making friends with the unfamiliar, and leaving a trail of bemused aliens in their wake. And as for Professor Zelmorb and his psychic classroom, well, they'd just have to brace themselves. Because tomorrow was another day, and Sophia Hernandez, proud representative of humanity, Deathworlder extraordinaire, had no intention of toning down her mental chaos anytime soon. After all, someone had to keep the galaxy on its toes or tentacles or hover pads, or whatever they happen to have. And who better to do it than a human with a penchant for spicy food, bad puns, and mental images of tap-dancing elephants? The universe, Sophia decided as she and Blawbacks entered their dorm building, had no idea what it was in for, but by the time she was done, it would never be the same again. And honestly, she wouldn't have it any other way.